Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another installment of our speaker series. Since February of this year, we have gathered nearly every Thursday at these lunch and learns to educate ourselves, celebrate cultural heritage, hear from the top elected officials on differing areas of our government, and to advocate for causes near to all of us. This, however, represents a different kind of gathering. This is not a typical month series. Rather, it is a commemoration as we observe Domestic Violence Awareness Month. But in a certain sense, we still do have cause to celebrate. For this month, we honor the lives of domestic violence survivors, we salute their strength and their courage, and we applaud the knowledge, awareness, and action by our invited speakers that will help prevent and heal further victimization. Which is why I'm so happy to introduce our next speakers, Anita, Pindiur, and Maribel Garcia, who will both discuss their roles on the front lines of caring for survivors of domestic abuse, how they give people a voice, and the tools to help themselves in a dire situation, and how we can help the cause even after Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Anita is the executive director of the Way Back In, which she has been with since 2002. Way Back In is a nonprofit that serves adults who are suffering from alcohol, drug, and gambling dependence. They have assisted over 10,000 clients over 40 years. She is a licensed clinical professional counselor and holds certification in substance use disorders, gambling disorders, domestic violence, and anger management. Anita also sits on the board of the Illinois Council on Problem Gambling, as well as the Illinois Alliance on Problem Gambling. She is involved with positive youth development, including the Addiction Recovery Team and the Opioid Task Force in Oak Park. Anita attended Loyola University for her undergraduate degree and Benedictine University for her Master of Science in Clinical Psychology. Our other guest, Maribel Garcia, is the founder and president of Break the Silence Foundation. This nonprofit organization advocates for victims of domestic violence and child abuse. As a domestic violence survivor, her passion is to be and project the voice for those who can't speak up or take action for themselves. Also, Break the Silence Foundation has partnered with the American Academy of Facial Plastic and Reconstructive Surgery and is the clearinghouse of the amazing Face-to-Face program. This powerful program has more than 2,000 board-certified plastic surgeons reconstructing domestic violence survivors' faces pro bono. Anita and Maribel, I would like to welcome both of you to our Domestic Violence Awareness Month speaker series and want to start off by asking you to introduce yourself, and before we dive in, just a little bit about your background and the work you have done at the Way Back In and Break the Silence Foundation respectively. Anita, if you would like to start us off, please, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I do have a short, well, apparently it's not that short, but I will make it short. A short PowerPoint presentation. So thank you so much for having me. The Way Back In is an organization here. We have locations in Maywood and Oak Park, as well as Forest Park and Melrose Park. And we do provide predominantly substance use and gambling use disorder services. Our main focus is on our recovery home and our extended residential care. So this is our Oak Park location, our women's location. And that is the one where we predominantly see many, and when it becomes Domestic Violence Month, and I am a certified domestic violence specialist. And so we do work very closely side by side with persons who are both recovering from addictions as well as issues with trauma and domestic violence abuse, or sexual abuse. We don't currently have a specific program, but we have for many years. And then when I first started here in 2002, that was my first group that I ran, was the Male Initiative Group. And that's when we work a lot with males who are domestic violence perpetrators, as well as our anger management program, and as well as men who are victims of violence. Often what we see is kind of that circular and genetic component and a component of family violence that happens over many generations. And so kind of breaking part of our stigma, breaking part of the issues with substance use is also breaking a lot of the violence. So October is National Domestic Violence Month. Don't see, my head is too big and it's very blurry. It started in 1989 in order to acknowledge and in order to kind of pay tribute to the victims, but also the survivors of domestic violence. I originally took the training in like 2001, and I've been certified since about 2002. And yet I have to say that when you look at the numbers and you look at everything, not much has changed. Though we are seeing progress, and at least we're seeing a lot of progress within the communities. we're seeing a lot of progress in how people respond to domestic violence. Just like addictions, we see a lot of stigma, we see a lot of shame, we see a lot of guilt, we see a lot of people never wanting to really talk about and acknowledge it. You know, it's not one of those things that you put in a newsletter, right? You don't send your Christmas letter to your family with your postcard and say like, oh, by the way, you know, he hit me again, and now I'm in treatment. But we see these comorbid kind of functions. And during the pandemic, what we have seen is not only a rise in addictions and a rise in overdoses, but we have also seen a rise in a lot of domestic violence. And so domestic violence advocates are reporting that there is, and some of it I'm not going to read. Now you can have the presentation and everybody can read themselves, but what there has been is more helpline calls. And what has seen is that there's actually less response, so less calls to the police, but more calls to hotlines, which probably has a lot to do with the fact that, you know, during COVID, what we have seen is people have been isolated and people have been at home, and everybody's at home. And so kids are there, and you know, maybe both partners are there, and so you never get time away from your abuser, right? Work for the abuser, work for you, for the perpetrator used to be that time where you were able to be safe or get away from it. And everybody's so tense. We were talking today with staff about how when you're driving around, everybody seems so upset and so tense and so full of rage. And so when you have that, and you have it at home, and that situation is there 24 hours a day, we definitely have seen a lot of it increasing during the COVID time, which has been very difficult. There's also been a lot of fear. We've had a lot of people being afraid to come into treatment for both substance use disorders as well as going to shelters, right? You never know, do I go into a shelter and save myself, my children, but then there's COVID. And so, you know, like, what do I pick? Which is the lesser of two evils? So we have seen over the years and over the last maybe 20 years or so, we have definitely seen a reduction in domestic violence and partner abuse. We know that, you know, about every minute somebody kind of is still being intimidated or abused. We know that that's about 10 million people annually. And like you can see, that's about 1 in every 3 women or 1 in every 4 men. So it is definitely happening a lot more than most people think. It definitely, you know, has that stigma. We definitely don't talk about it. A lot of times we don't even really realize that that's different and that's not normal, that most people don't kind of engage in that. This is just your relationship. And because it is often generational, you see it kind of happening over and over again. But we do know that children are suffering, and when children are watching and seeing it, it becomes a problem. So as I mentioned, the Way Back In predominantly focuses on mental health and substance use disorders, but we have pillars here within the community who will do just domestic violence. So sometimes we work very, very closely with pillars and Sarah's in here in Oak Park. So when somebody is only experiencing domestic violence, we are able to work together and refer people to the appropriate places. As well as sometimes our clients do need additional services and need to be able to be with someone who understands. And so we'll provide them with additional services and be able to link them up with an agency that will be able to work with, especially if it's sexual violence, sexual trauma, when they might require a lot. And when we are looking at kind of the cycle of abuse, we definitely see, you know, kind of the honeymoon phase where everything's great. And that's usually where it starts, right? Like it never starts off with like, oh my, you know, you don't go on like a first date or you meet someone and they start kicking you, right? So it usually it's great and it's loving and they're a great person. And then we see the tension building and the acute and explosions. And as we travel through the cycle, what we find a lot of times is the survivors and the persons who are being perpetrated against, so the victims at that time, often deal with their abuse through substance use, and they often also deal with gambling. But we see is a high correlation between women who are victims of domestic violence and gambling use disorders. And that is not something that people usually talk about just because it's not something you think. But a lot of times, what we see is that gambling use disorders will actually affect physical pain. So when you're gambling and you're in the middle of your action phase, you don't feel physical pain as well as emotional pain. And so we'll see that people are escaping, and it's a great escape, right? You get to sit there, you get to sit at a slot machine, you can press a button for 7 hours straight and no one really bothers you. And when you walk into a casino, people are nice to you, people ask you if you want a drink. For once, you're being taken care of and you're not always the one who's being maybe humiliated or slapped or choked. And so what we see is there's a huge correlation between those for the abusers. I put in some phone numbers here. So if you are ever working with anyone, or you know someone, or you want to maybe just give them somebody to talk to, as we see a lot of these things go very much hand in hand. We know that domestic violence, suicide, and substance use disorders are all kind of intertwined. And perhaps Maribel will talk a little bit more about this. I don't know what she's going to talk about, but in Illinois, we do have protections, so people can file for kind of an emergency order of protection, an interim order of protection, plenary order of self-protection. Even in the best of circumstances, those who are difficult, we always would work with domestic violence advocates who are in the courts, and they would be really excellent at being able to guide somebody through all these steps. But it is definitely a process, and there's definitely steps to it. And that's one of those things that COVID really did have a hard time with. Courts closed, not everything went to Zoom immediately. And in that interim, there were many people who were victims of violence and really didn't feel safe and didn't feel like they had any protections. And so we know that domestic violence is kind of a common problem, and it leads to so many consequences, especially that trauma and that PTSD and anxiety, which often does lead to substance use disorders. And you know, when you talk about substance use disorders, like what do you see? And so we know that the triggers are depression, anxiety, and trauma. And so we kind of, when we're looking, because that is what we usually see, we know that about 15% of the population will suffer from a substance use disorder, and that's irregardless of anything that's going on. We know that substance use disorder does not discriminate against anything, but whenever we add extra components like domestic violence in there, that increases the rates, as well as about 2% of the general population will have issues with gambling use disorders, which, you know, it never sounds like a lot, but then when you look at a state like Illinois, we're looking at over 200,000 people. And so we know that, you know, there's tolerance and withdrawal and isolation, which is what we saw a lot during the pandemic. And that was one of the main issues during the pandemic. People weren't going to see their doctors as much. They weren't socializing with as many people. We were so withdrawn and so closed off, and we were so by ourselves. We were often, there was no one to notice. There was no one to reach out and say, do you need help? And so we kind of see these things. And then one of the big things with addiction is that we know that it's the biological component and it's the environmental component. And then environmental, you know, where you talk about a chaotic home or peer influence. And sometimes when we're looking at a combination of things, right, like home life isn't that great, there's a lot of abuse, maybe I'm hanging out with people more, but then they're encouraging me to use more. And a lot of times these cycles just continue over and over again. We do know that both gambling and substance use disorders do release dopamine, and they release them in such a way where you feel satisfaction and pleasure, which is one of the reasons why often substance use is used so much, or substances are used so much among victims, as it really does take that emotional and the psychological pain away. I think when we're talking about addictions, a lot of people don't really realize how much is too much. And people always ask, do you think they drink too much? I don't know, do you? Like you told me, right? But we do know that there are some dietary guidelines, and we know that like 1 to 2 drinks per day is moderate drinking. We know that 5 or more is kind of the binge drinking, and heavy drinking is more than 4 drinks for males and 3 drinks for women. So it sometimes doesn't sound as so you think you could definitely drink like more, and it really definitely isn't. And so we know that we're seeing 12-year-olds, which is usually when they start counting, and we have problems with like 140 million Americans, and we have a lot of binge drinking, adolescent drinking. Each day, about 29 people die from drug impaired driving. And we know that alcohol sales have very much skyrocketed during the pandemic. So what we have seen is that the sales of online alcohol use have really gone up, and then just the general sales of alcohol have gone up during the pandemic. What we have seen go down is people going to treatment. What we have seen is people getting less medical attention and even going into shelters. We see doctors reporting that they're seeing more fatty livers between 2019 and 2020, especially among younger populations. And they're talking about seeing liver disorders and cirrhosis in people as young as in their 20s and their 30s, which is not usually something that was seen in past times. And we kind of put in some of those pop culture kind of things where, you say like mommy juice and rosé all day and wine down Wednesdays, and they're all fun and funny, but then when it does start becoming a problem, it is a problem, because it isn't the one Wednesday I had wine, It's the fact that it happens every week. And then one of the things that I would like to pay attention to, and I know the Rotary is very involved in the community and helping the community, is a treatment gap. We know that out of, like the 22.7 million of Americans who actually need treatment, only like 2.5, so 0.9, less than a percent of people get treatment. And so that's a huge disparity when we're talking about 8% of people needing, or almost 9% of people needing treatment, and less than 1% of people getting treatment. We see there's also a disparity between what people are getting treatment and for what, so mental health and health services and substance use disorders. And we know that during the pandemic, there has been so much difficulty with sleeping, with eating, with substance use, worsening conditions, and we've seen people suffering significantly from anxiety and depressive disorders, which can all be linked back to, kind of those cycles of violence. And we have seen that with youth specifically. And what we have seen is a big disparity between the Black and Brown communities, where we have seen an increase of 46% in the Hispanic and 48% within the Black community. So we know that there's a challenge, we know there's problems, and definitely not enough people are getting treatment. And we can see that, people are struggling. So, like people of 150,000 or more a year did not struggle, but everybody else did. So we kind of can figure that during this crisis, more people struggled than not during the pandemic. And so one of the things is that this is a public health issue, both domestic violence, substance use disorders. These are public health issues that we should be addressing. And Donovich talks about, we need exercise and good sleep and good nutrition and limited screen time, and then connecting with loved ones. And that is often really hard to do when you're in a home that's isolating, when you're in a home where somebody is preventing you from kind of being happy or being safe. So if you have any individual questions, I'm always around, so you can always call and email me and ask me so that we can share more information, since that went pretty quickly. And I'll turn it over to Maribel. Thank you so much.
Oh, that was powerful, Anita. Thank you, thank you. And you cover, I believe, almost everything that I was going to say, which is good, because then, no, it's good because now I have the opportunity to tell how I initiated, the foundation, Break the Silence Foundation. First of all, I want to thank Clerk Karen Yarbrough for giving me the opportunity to be here with you guys, and also Betty Torres, that I know for a few years, to make this happen. Thank you very much. Break the Silence Foundation was born in 2005, and this happened because, as a survivor of domestic violence myself, I can tell you that this is the worst experience or emotional cancer a human being can go through. As a child, my father beat my mom and myself mercilessly. But my worst nightmare started when, as a teen, my father sexually molested me for a very long time. In my adulthood, I chose the wrong partners and finally fell into the hands of an alcoholic who beat me without compassion, emotional and physically. Mind you, the emotional abuse is the worst than physical. And
Maribel, this is Bob. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but could you pull your microphone in a little bit closer?
okay.
You've got a wonderful speaking voice. It's just a little soft.
Okay, let me just go.
Thank
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now, Bob? Okay.
Yes.
And the pain was so unbearable that I reached a point that I decided to jump from a second-story balcony to end my pain. Not really to end my life, but the emotional pain is worse than the physical. And when I woke up in ICU, I realized that God gave me a chance to get out of this hell and help others. I was determined to do this. It all ended when a friend who is a psychologist helped me out of this nightmare. That's why reaching out for help is so vital. And of course, I had to make the decision at the end, the person, whether it's a victim of domestic violence or an alcoholic or any type of addiction, and you know that, Anita, at the end, the person is the one who decide, because the victim or the alcoholic can get all the help in the world, but it's up to them to say, you know what, I'm being in denial for so many years, now it's time to think about me. I'm a survivor in every sense of the word. In November in 2016, I had a brain surgery to remove an aneurysm. Domestic violence could not end with me. Neither an aneurysm. So that's why when I was in intensive care, that I have a conversation with myself, and I said, like the movie with Jennifer Lopez, enough is enough. That was my decision. The person has to decide for their own sake. And I said, enough. And I got help with this friend of mine. And I decided, I moved to Chicago alone with my children. And I said, I need to start. I need to do something. Because back then, I didn't have any help. Because like 45 years ago, let's put it this way, we didn't have the help that we have right now. We have so many programs. We have so many people. Now, even the hairdressers, they have to take the courses of domestic violence in order to detect, a person that is enduring domestic violence. So I opened Break the Silence Foundation 2005 in a basement in the furnace room. That's when it was created. Today, we have this beautiful and powerful and wonderful foundation, and we're helping in the community of Berwyn. We're helping in the community of Cicero, and even in Cook County, we have people coming all the way from Indiana. Last night, we have a beautiful domestic violence event where one of the state representatives looked at me, because we had tons of guests, and we had like 20 survivors. One of them that is part of the face-to-face program that was mentioned before, that we have more than 2,000 plastic surgeons helping these victims reconstruct their faces. But we do the inside reconstruction, because you can be beautiful outside, and if you are deformed emotionally inside, it defeats the purpose. We have to start from inside out. Your mind, renew your mind in order for that person continue. So we had Makira Bradley, that her partner, her ex-husband, slammed her on the pavement and disfigured her face. So she's going into reconstruction surgery. And it was a moment. It was the moment. It was an epic moment that night. And we need to reach out, because now, as Anita was mentioning, with the pandemic, numbers has been rising. Before, it was one woman, not counting men, children, seniors, teenagers. It was 1 in 9. It raised to 1 every 5 seconds. 1 every 5 seconds we're having and still having domestic violence. And we have a program, we have a special program, right? And we have every year a Purple Gala. The Purple Gala, last year and this year we couldn't have it because of the pandemic, obvious reason. But the highlight of the gala is a powerful fashion show that after 1 year of workshops, 1 year of conferences, those victims, they graduate, and they are the models of the night. We don't bring other models. We have our own survivors, triumphant survivors, walking through the runway. So also we do have the workshops right here. We offer our victims, whether they're men, because we're not only concentrating women, unfortunately, domestic violence does not discriminate. It doesn't matter. Child abuse, seniors, those two are the most vulnerable ones, the seniors and the children. If they're not protected by their own parents, who will protect them? So we have workshops, therapy, counseling. My husband, he's a certified facilitator, and he has a very, very interesting workshop, how to avoid falling in love with a jerk. And it's great, you know. And how to open, how to see the red flags once you get out of that relationship. If you're a young woman, you're a young man, probably you're hoping for a good partner. So these, not before are you married, but before you marry again, we have this amazing workshop. And this is it. I really thank you. And if any questions, Anita and I, we're here to answer. And thank you very much for having me.
Well, we have a few questions in the chat room. Sorry. Going to the top, we had a question from Chief Talley. How many domestic violence offenders are currently receiving services either internally or externally from the way back in or from the
That was
foundation?
offenders. You know what? I must have misread that. I thought that was victims. So offenders, we only have we don't have anybody who's court mandated at this point in time. So currently we don't have anyone receiving those services. The victims is about 75% of our women residents who have been through some type of violence in their past, and then about 50% of those will receive additional services. With men, many of them have also been victimized, but usually they don't really require and or don't seek out additional services. So they just received treatment here at the way back in.
Now, we understand the way back in used to be all male and that now it's a mixed gender. Could you give us an update on what the breakdown is by gender?
Oh, sure. So in 2002, the way back in, the Grateful House merged. So it's been some time now. So we have about 25% of our population is women and about 75% of our populations are male. We have and we just have more locations for males, and we have about 16 or so beds that are for a female population between our extended residential care and our recovery home. And then in our outpatient services, especially in our gambling services, it's about 50-50. So we have over 50 clients right now, and about half of them are female and about half of them are male.
I see now, Anita, that you did answer these questions in the chat room, so I encourage others to look there as well. And did you answer also whether either of your organizations collect clothing for your clients?
We always collect donations, and we really always appreciate donations, and thank you so much for that question. Many times we will have clients who come in from all walks of life, and sometimes they don't have anything when they come in, so it's always very helpful to have something.
And then we had a question, Maribel, did you attend Triton College?
I'm sorry?
The question is, did you attend Triton College?
No.
Okay. We had a misidentification there. I thought maybe you were one of my former students. Now we have other members here that may have questions. I think that I'm going to look again, but that might be all from the chat room. Oh, here's one. Let's see. Oh, from Cook County. If we are ever aware of any ongoing domestic violence taking place in our families, friends, or neighbors, what is the best first step for us to take? Contacting the authorities or reaching out to helplines or groups like yours to help the victim? Or is this an issue where someone involved must take the first step?
Well, it is very healthy to encourage the person. That's the first step that always works out, is to encourage the person to seek, we do have a support group, but to seek, the person, for example, I've had many of them that have been saying, okay, my father advised me to come over here. Or I looked it up in the, sometimes they get to a point that they're so desperate that they.
Still here, but it's muted.
Sometimes they look it up and they Google it and they say they type domestic violence, and we have a system that it pops up our name, all others organization. But first of all, and if they don't, and if let's say it's in an extreme case, we are mandated reporters, and when we see a case immediately that is life threatening, we call the police. And your family is a life threatening case, you have to immediately call the police. But if it's going, at step one, step two, try to reach out for a group, try to reach out for a organization. We have plenty. You know what? This Break the Silence Foundation, domestic violence is endless. We can have tons of programs, and we can save. Our slogan is, let's change and save lives. Let's make history. But you work with 2 or 3, 5, 10, 20 family, and you have tons of other victims waiting for help. But some of them, the fear is the worst enemy. They're afraid of what my family is going to know. The fear and the silence can kill a person. Because I had a case that this person, she was going through domestic violence, and it wasn't until she was dead that the family found out that she was going through domestic violence. So it is very important to encourage your family or your family member to seek help immediately.
Yeah, sometimes just being there for someone is really important. Like Maribel pointed out, if you know it's a life-threatening emergency, something's going on, you call 911. Yes. But sometimes it's after the fact, sometimes it might be like a day or two later. It's not like you're going to be really able to do anything. So being there for the person, offering them the support helplines. Sometimes even if they know, it's just good that someone else knows, and just saying, I'm here for you. How can I help you? A lot of times victims can't get out because they really truly are trapped. We often don't think that people really are. And it has nothing to do, like Maribel said, it discriminates against all stigma. So a lot of times we feel like if somebody is in a financial situation where they're doing well, they can't possibly be trapped, and they still can be. A lot of times they're afraid for their lives. They might have been threatened. So maybe what they need is really just some time and some support to get out. Maybe they just need a safe space to be on Friday evenings when he goes out to play, poker, and then he comes home drunk. So maybe she just needs to stay with you. Maybe the kids need to sleep over. So sometimes these are small baby steps. We all would like to say, like, we'll just leave this asshole, but it's not always that simple, and it's not always that easy. And a lot of times we just don't understand these fine little intricacies and how long it takes. So sometimes let's just be there for someone. Just say, do you need to talk to anyone? Do you want to talk to me? Do you want to talk to a provider? And here, maybe come over to my house and you can use my phone, because you can't really use your phone at home because he's going to track your phone. So a lot of times it's just being in there, being a support network, and offering any small services that we can. It's not always going to be they're going to leave immediately. That is usually the most dangerous time for a victim, is the leaving part. And so many times they don't. Many times they have multiple children, and you can't take them out of school. You won't be able to live anywhere but live in a car. With teens, we see this a lot with teenagers as well. A lot of times it's the families who say, don't date this person, right? She's bad for you. This girl isn't the one for you. And then when they get too far into that relationship, they really can't come home and say, she's abusing me. So they hide, they lie, and they really can't be honest about it. So sometimes it's just giving people that space and that place.
And something important, if I may, something very important that we need to tell the victims to encourage your family: document everything, date, the incident, time, to document everything. Now they have an application, because some of these predators, they're very slick. They look into their phones, they look into the emails, but this application, they cannot break in. And I will pass it on later on. I don't have it right here. And that is like talking parents. When a couple get divorced and they talk through this application. So there is application that, let's say this woman, she's documenting everything, and that is vital for court maybe in the future.
Oh, I'm sorry, doctor, I think you're muted.
Yeah.
There, okay. What are some spousal red flags that we or our loved ones should look for in our relationships? Are there some key areas to be observed?
Oh, yes, many. The red flags sometimes at the beginning when a couple gets married, everything like Anita was pointing out, with the graphic, oh, the honeymoon, everything, and then the changes start. Financial control, family control. She's not allowed to go and see their family. I mean, timing, you get out from work at 5 o'clock, and let's say the travel it's 15 minutes and she gets 5 minutes later, where were you? There's so many controlling mentally, control, burst without any reason, changes of mood that before she didn't see that, and like I said, financial control, and even if she's working, he handles all the money. She has to wear what he says or she says. And the list is endless. I know Anita, I'm gonna, allow her to say, but there's so many things. Traveling, she cannot travel alone. Let's say their family lives in another state. If he cannot go, she's not going. It is sad. It is very, very sad. Controlling the kids, putting the kids against them. But the red flags we can determine before you can get to the point, before you marry the person. There's a way to test them. And we have that I can share with Anita, the how to avoid falling in love with a jerk, and it's very key. It's very long to explain right here. But yes, you can detect that, Anita.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, Maribel is correct. Anything that feels very controlling and feels like you're not an equal partner in that relationship is usually what it is. And a lot of times when you're being blamed for things that are beyond your control. So jealousy is a big one. But it's not just that, whenever we're involved in a romantic relationship, no matter how long we've been involved in it, whenever that other person is jealous, it's always like, oh, that's kind of, nice. But this isn't just like they're, I'm jealous a lot of people are looking at you. It's that they start blaming you, right? It's your fault because you dressed like a slut that he was looking at you. And so there's the belittling, there's the putting you down, there's that making you feel responsible for things. Like even things like even if she says, I'm going to leave you, or he says, I'm going to leave you, and she says, well, it's not like you're going to be able to take the kids, right? No, you're a loser. No one's going to be able to give you the kids. You're stuck here. So it definitely is the financial control where, yeah, you don't know where your bank accounts are. You have no access. They give you an allowance. It's not that, often with gambling disorders, we see that one person always takes over the money, but they share it still, right? You still know where your money is, you know what account it is, or you just don't want to, right? No one wants to balance a checkbook, or he will see that you're just not part of that account. You just don't get any access to it. So definitely, the more small you feel and the more controlled you feel, the more we know that that's kind of a form of abuse.
Yes.
Thank you both. Is there any current legislation or initiatives geared towards curbing domestic violence or increasing programs to assist survivors that we should be aware of and could put our support behind?
I'm not aware of anything right now. They're all, there's always a lot of things at the beginning, right, of the year that come out, and then many things get vetoed down later on. But it's just always kind of encouraging that there is plenty of help and treatment and support for domestic violence, and then everything else that kind of falls below that. Even health services, any legislation that protects health services, so Medicare, Medicaid, is very vital. Otherwise, how will you get help when there is an injury, or when you do need to get out, or when you do need to leave?
Yeah, exactly.
The next question is, how often do you see men abused by women?
I have quite a few. But you know what? Let me tell you, there's plenty. But because they're men, they're proud or they feel ashamed that what their friends might tell them, and you allow a woman, because they stereotype, you know what I mean? They stereotype. Why you allow a woman to beat you up? I remember one guy that we were working with him, and he came to our office. He was bleeding completely. He was bleeding. She scratched him, and everything. And as a mandated report, I was entitled to call the police. But he begged me. He says, you know what? It's okay. She's gone. She's gone, and she's the mother of my children. That really broke me, because if he would have been another guy, she was a candidate to go to jail, because it runs, both ways. You don't touch a woman, but you don't touch a man. It's just like that. I had many cases, and they come, but I believe it's one it's one man it's 1 in 12 men, which is a lot. Now it's 1 in 5, one woman in every 5 seconds, one woman every 5 seconds, and it's one man every 12. But they don't come forward. It is very hard to make them come forward. But yes, there's a lot of abuse men.
We also see a lot more with men, kind of that abuse that happened perhaps over time. So they're often were abused by their dads, and then there's a lot of emotional abuse that results in there, or they're just within a very unhealthy relationships. Often. So, and it does get very underreported. I think that, 2020, 2021, we're in a very different age and era, so things are much better. But for a long time, sometimes you would be afraid to call the police, because when the police shows up, who are they going to believe? They're going to believe the female, right? Because, which way does abuse go? We were very kind of gender specific, as well as there is quite a lot of abuse, and the stats are about the same in some same-sex relationships. So we have to, often that makes it very complicated when police officers show up and it's 2 males or 2 females, and one person is alleging abuse over the other. A lot of times they're like, well, what do we do, right? So these become very difficult situations, and that's why we usually encourage the victims to become survivors by seeking help and kind of getting out of that. I'm never anti having support from law enforcement, but often it's they can only provide the support for those few minutes for that day, as opposed to long term people will need to seek out other help.
Thank you both so much. I wonder, we have just a few more minutes. Betty had posted, let's see, I'm looking for it here. Betty had posted, the police and courts were against me, even though my ex admitted the abuse. She had commented earlier, I'm a survivor and struggled for years before I finally made the move to leave my environment, and it is very liberating. I'm living my best life now.
Yeah.
Betty,
that is wonderful.
Would you like to unmute and comment, Betty?
Betty.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so I actually work for Clerk Yarborough, and I actually met Madi and her organization, and I was with my ex-husband for 35 years.
Yeah.
So I dealt with the mental, the emotional, the psychological, anything and everything that you can think of. The drug addiction, he was a sex addict, he was an alcoholic. It just went from one level to the next. But I still had children, and that's what held me back, is I still had a child. They're both still in grade school. Okay, one went to high school. Now we got to wait for the other. And for me, I financially, I could have walked away, but I really tried and tried. I was not codependent to all of that stuff, put him into rehab many of times, short of being bankrupt. But yeah, what I find out later is like, yeah, there was a lot of underlying hints that I probably should have taken a lot more seriously. And that was even before having kids. But I was just one of those women that yeah, I'm educated, I've got a good job, but I want to see this through. I didn't want to feel like a loser. So, I mean, we become really hard on ourselves.
Mm.
One of the things, the psychological was I had to hear from my ex is nobody's ever going to want you. You're nothing, you're fat, you're ugly, you're this, that, or whatever. So there was a lot of ugliness that was going on. And I was just looking the other way. I was like, no, I got to be good to myself. I'm still trying to get my kids up and out. And one thing led to another. And I said, that's it. And my husband was very popular in the communities. So when the police would come, you realize who your husband is. Yeah, but aren't you going to do anything? They're like, no, we'll just leave it alone. Just let him, sleep it off, so on and so forth. So that was really hard. So, yeah, what's the purpose of calling the police if my local police department, the commander, so on and so forth, wouldn't do anything? And, one day I said, that's it. You're out of here. And I felt like I had to follow through. If I went this far to put him out in the media, I had to follow it through. Even though, my ex, admitted to the courts and to the police, he did all this stuff, they still let him go. So that's discouraging.
That is very, thank you for sharing. I mean, that is, you have a wonderful ending to your story, but there's often many people who suffer in that silence, and it is that stigma, right? We say, till death do us part, and we kind of believe that, and we want to stick with it. And we usually end up with this person because there was something great about him initially, and we loved them, right? It wasn't like, you just ran, like you're now walking on the street, somebody hits you, and you're like, well, I'm gonna marry you, right? So it's one of those things where no one can be blamed for that. No one sees it, and often, and never to defend an abuser, but often they might even, it becomes this whole cycle, and becomes this, and they don't know how to get out of it, and they might even be serious about wanting to change. Initially, when I started working, I worked with domestic violence perpetrators, and it was really interesting to sometimes hear some of their stories, right? And to understand like what that psychology was behind some of their thinking, and how broken some of that thinking that they had. So it's a whole cycle that we really need to educate, and we need to educate from a very young age, and we need to educate everyone, our boys or girls, of we don't touch each other, we don't hit each other. That is not a form of love. That is not a form of kind of how people in relationships work.
That's right. And it's very interesting that what Betty said, that when you have kids, you feel like trapped in a way because you are more mother than a woman, So you're there protecting your kids. And the little this, many of them know that because of the kids, they are the reason, they are the main factor to grab them and and leave. In most cases, I had a case that we had a family therapy with my husband, and it broke my heart to see there were two girls, and he was 10 years old. He went on his knee in front of the mom and say, "Mom, please leave daddy," right in front of him, right in front of him. We are better off without him. And we sometimes we don't see those red flags, but I've been in many sessions with teenagers, and 85%, they rather see their parents divorce than continue this living hell. But some women, they are trapped because they're not educated in a way that they don't have a profession. He is the breadwinner. So what she's gonna do? Like some of them, they tell me, "What am I gonna do? I really want to leave him desperately, but I don't know. I don't know how. I have never worked in my life." That's another program that we're getting ready, that we're preparing for 2022, to educate them. whether it's a chef, a dressmaker, hairdresser, whatever, to prepare them in order to say, you know what, I don't need him if he doesn't decide, or he's continuing denial, and I don't need to change and whatever. So they are prepared to say, you know what, I don't need you in my life, in my children's life this way. I have my profession, and they can leave. But because of the children, I say, no, I'm here because he's the father of my kids, and they rather, the majority of the children, trust me, they rather see them get divorced than continue a living hell.
And a lot of times I think for many women, and yeah, there is a financial need, but sometimes many women are educated, they have jobs, like Betty was saying. A lot of times though, when you're a mom, you want to protect your kids, and so you feel like you have to protect them 100% of the time. And because courts aren't, I think people are doing a much better job in 2021 than they ever have before. Law enforcement courts were very responsive. But sometimes the law isn't necessarily fair. And so we know that maybe the kids will end up with him 50% of the time. And then am I going to be able to protect them 50% of the time when they're with him versus when they're with me 100% of the time?
I'm sorry, I'm going to make a point. Now that you're the officers, I've had a few police officers in my office, and they are a family, not all of them. But when the perpetrator is a police officer, they always get away with murder. The majority of the time they get away with murder. Because I saw a police officer defending his coworker, and he told him, because the wife told me that his coworker said, if you're gonna beat her up inside the house, not where there are witnesses. So I was like, so it's sad. It is sad. The majority, they're trapped, depending on the position. Like Betty Torres, he was a public figure. So look at them. They were on their side. So sometimes, not all the time, we feel trapped. And anyway, we cannot depend on the police if he is a police officer or if he is a public figure. So it's very sad. I'm sorry that I'm saying this, but this is reality. This is what I've seen.
Well, that was a horrible incident that you reported on there. Henderson Yarborough has a comment to make.
Hello, I believe that's Anita.
Yeah, hey, Mr. Anderson, how are you?
All right, yes, I just wanted to make a comment that I've lived next door to your place for more than 20 years. And I've been completely satisfied with how disciplined and how nice and how helpful and how respectful each and every one of your residents are or have been.
Thank you.
Years. Courteous, the whole shot. Could not ask for better neighbors.
Oh, well, thank you. We try.
Thank you, Henderson. Well, with just a few minutes to go, now it's just 2 minutes. I'll just, I thank you both for speaking today, but it's been very enlightening. The data you provided was very provocative and important for us to know. Again, this is such a relevant topic for us, and by being better informed, we can help others and perhaps be the rescuer someday to get people in need to find the right services. There were a couple of more questions, but
real quick.
oh, Viola. Oh yeah, on the auction, huh?
Yeah.
We're gonna have an auction announcement here.
Real quickly, I just want to open an extended invitation for volunteers. We are looking for volunteers for the Rotary Auction Committee. And if you guys or anyone that you may know would like to be a volunteer, please give me a call. Be reached at 708-955-1964. So just make my phone ring and please volunteer. We need all the assistance that we can get. Thank you.
When is your next meeting?
The next meeting is
Sunday,
this Sunday coming up
At what time?
at 4:30.
And the location is Henderson Yarborough. Karen and
17 South 2nd.
217 South 2nd. So there'll be an email that'll go out to everyone regarding that. But if you'd like to join us in planning early, we figure that every Rotarian in the club will be involved with the auction in one way or another. But in this early planning, your assistance is critical. We're also establishing the hard, fast date so that we can have people save the date. And so please respond to the survey that I emailed out to you early this morning. And with that, again, thank you so much to our speakers. And while she's not here still, I thank Karen Yarborough for bringing us wonderful, relevant topics and wonderful people each week. What a wonderful place here at Tom's Steakhouse. We'll be looking at other locations, but there's a home run that was hit here today with this wonderful room and the service and the amazingly inexpensive food items. Everyone have a great week, and this meeting is adjourned at 1:30 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you.
What time?